What is up, YouTube? So today I want to talk about my favorite delay plugins and how I like to set them up and use them. And this is actually a request that comes from one of my Patreons. And I've actually been getting a lot of requests about whether I do like one-on-one Skype lessons and stuff like that. And I actually don't. But for those who don't know, I actually run a Patreon program. And I've got various tiers there. And I do actually have a tier which I offer sort of entrance to like a private Discord group with a couple of producers there. And I use this group to kind of, help people. It's less of a one-on-one kind of situation and more of a kind of support group where we do kind of like track feedback and ideas and stuff like that. For those who are wondering if I do one-on-one lessons, I don't. Check out my Patreon if you're interested in this kind of like music producer support group type thing. So this one was requested by a producer called Mr.Speaker, and he's been wondering how I use delays and which delays I prefer, how I set them up, and all sorts of stuff like that. However, it's kind of more focusing on ARPs and lead sounds. So that's what I want to do today. I want to jump into an ARP that I actually created for a track I'm working on, and as well as a lead sound that I created. And I'm using a delay in sort of two different ways here. So let's dive in and have a look. So I've got this ARP sound that I've created. I used TAL bassline, which is that SH101 emulation that I've spoke about in a previous video. And it's still pretty raw. I mean, I've got a dual filter on there to create movement in certain sort of breaks in the track and stuff like that. And a bit of low cut EQ over here. So what I want to do with the sound is I want to show you guys a couple of different delay plugins that I'm really enjoying at the moment. I'm sure you guys know Color Copy is one of my favorites, but I'm also going to use Soundtoy's Echoboy because I know that Mr.Speaker, who requested this tutorial, actually uses that delay and he enjoys using that delay as well. So I'm going to use both and try set them up in a similar sort of way and show you guys how I like to set up my delay specifically for like ARP type sounds. So one thing that's really cool about both of those delay plugins is they've got really nice sounding saturation algorithms on the feedback. So what that means is, often with the kind of built-in delays that you get in a DAW is they sound very clean, which is good for a lot of applications, of course. But if you've got a lead sound or an ARP sound that's already cutting through and you want it to kind of remain as the main focus, using something like saturation on your feedback helps to kind of create that contrast between the really clean cutting lead sound and your kind of delay tails. So if you're not following what I'm talking about, I want to show you quickly using both of these delay plugins. So first off, let's start with Echoboy. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bypass this and we're going to have a quick listen to what the lead sounds like soloed with no effects and anything like that on it. A really simple kind of ARP type pattern that I created using Cubase's Step Designer. I have outlined that in a previous tutorial. So yeah, let's get started and dive into Echoboy over here. So my favorite type of delay mode to use is ping pong. Reason being is that it kind of creates this sort of center image of your dry sound, and then it kind of staggers the pan of those feedbacks left and right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly play like a quick sort of hit of this lead sound, and then you're going to hear that kind of echoey motion that's happening with these ping pong. So the really cool thing about Echoboy is you can actually set the time of each of those independently, but I'm not going to do that because that creates a little bit too much of a complex motion going on. I kind of want to focus in on the saturation model over here, but I first want to show you kind of the nature of a ping pong delay. So here what we can do is we can actually turn this feedback up just so we can hear what's going on, and then turn the bypass effect off. So let's have a listen here. So for these running ARP lead sounds, I like to use a 1/8 dotted And then for the more kind of like leady sounds which aren't running on a sequence, I like to use a 1/4 dotted, which is a bit slower, and that creates less of a rhythmic pattern and more a kind of like echoey kind of pattern, but I'm going to outline that a little bit later. So 1/8 dotted and 1/8 regular is kind of like the difference between a kind of 1.5 pattern and a 1 pattern, if that makes any sense. So let's have a listen now what effect is going on. So for those who have been following my tutorials on my music for a while, you can instantly tell that's like the delay kind of setup that I often use. However, because it's a kind of running lead sound, those tails I feel are cutting through a little bit too clean. So what we can do is, it's got this kind of like filter over here with low cut and high cut. I like to turn the low cut up a little bit. So what happens then is the dry signal still comes through sort of unedited, and the delay tails will then have a bit of filter on them. And then let's move over to this kind of like saturation model over here. So I like the Space Echo. I believe it's a emulation of the Roland Space Echo, which is a very well used kind of actual hardware effect that is quite sort of well renowned in music history. And I also know that it was used quite a lot in Goa, and it has this particular kind of saturation sound that's not too brutal, but actually pretty lush sounding. So let's have a listen to what I'm talking about. See, it's almost like this kind of like bit of instability, like a bit of chorus kind of effect that's going on there. And it's due to the nature of the fact that I believe the original Space Echo delay actually had a tape inside it, and that had various kind of inaccuracies and stuff like that. So that's going to create kind of a contrast to the kind of clean ARP lead sound that we already had in the dry signal. So let's play around with these kind of like input, output, and saturation, just so that it's not blasting through so loud, as well as the mix to kind of get that dry signal to cut through a little bit more. Awesome, that sounds great. So you'll notice like I said, the dry signal is cutting through still nice and clean. And you've just got these kind of like very faint kind of tails that are kind of flapping in the distance in the side channels. So that's kind of how I like to set this kind of plugin up for these kind of more ARP sort of sounds. Let's move on to color copy. So this is my other favorite delay plugin. It's very quick and easy to set up, and you get an sort of instant awesome sound out of it. You've got various controls over the saturation, again, like I was saying, to create that kind of contrast between the dry and the wet. So how I like to do it is, let's turn this mix down 1/8 dotted. It's kind of defaulted to that. And here I like to turn this guy to like 66%. So what this is these are your tape heads. So this kind of green indicator over here indicates the difference as to where your left and right playheads are grabbing the sort of output delay from, if that makes sense. So with a 1/8 dotted, I like to put my right or left, I like to stagger them, one of them on 66 and the other one on 100. And when I do a 1/4 dotted, I like to put it on 50%. I find that sounds more rhythmically kind of correct, if that makes sense. So anyway, here you've got this kind of feedback algorithm, and you've got various sort of colors you can choose from. So this is similar to the kind of different styles, I guess, that you've got in Echoboy. You've obviously got a lot more choice with Echoboy, a lot of these kind of classic kind of stuff. And here, the difference is that you don't have as many choices, but you can kind of sweep between those choices. So it's almost infinite. You can kind of get somewhere between sparkle and fuzz, funny adjectives, or somewhere between snap and dusk. So I guess, play around with those, find out what you like. You've got a brightness and a saturation control, and then you've got this kind of vintage setting over here. So when we're creating this contrast, this is kind of quite cool to use. But if you're looking for a kind of cleaner delay sound, I would probably turn this to low and not go so hectic on these guys over here. But anyway, we're trying to create this contrast. So let's have a listen to how this sounds. Awesome. So let's move on to a kind of more leady sound, less of a kind of running ARP type sound. So I've got this over here. I think this is it. It says tell bassline, but it's actually Serum. I should change that. So here, as you can see, it's kind of like spaced out. So we've got the space to play here with more kind of feedback tails. And I've got a reverb on here that's actually the Serum FX reverb. But I did that because I want to show you guys, I want to be able to mute it on the actual inserts channel. And I want to put a different delay before the Serum reverb, if that makes sense. So let me show you what it sounds like with and without this reverb. I'm going to put those delays before, show you how I set up a delay with a more kind of spacious type of sound. Cool. So let's put on Echoboy over here. So again, let's switch this guy over to ping pong and let's go for a 1/4. 1/4 dotted on both. We can turn the feedback up quite a bit. We'll probably want to go for a bit more feedback on this one. And we might not want to go so hectic on the saturation here, maybe just a little bit, but we don't want to go for that kind of like contrasting effect because we've got the space in between the main hits of the dry signal over here, as you can actually see in the MIDI. So let's go with a little bit of filter and let's listen to the effect. So I'm not sure if you can notice, one of the main reasons why I like to use something like a 1/4 dotted, particularly with these kind of like spacious leads, is when you've got like something that, you've got these different rhythms that are spaced out, the lead kind of like echoes, and then when the next one plays, it, fills in those gaps, and it creates like more of a rhythm, which then kind of like echoes out. It's really hard to explain, but let me actually put these a bit closer together and then play it. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier to pick up then. You're almost creating these kind of like chords when it overlays, and these kind of like rhythmic differences when it hits in places where it doesn't overlay. So when we put like the reverb on, it's, helps to create like this varying, lead, but with kind of paddy sound around it. Something like this. Cool. So just a little extra tidbit about how I like to use reverbs on these kind of like ARP type lead sounds. So I like to use a send over here. I'm going to use Cubase's built-in IR reverb called Reverence. I've actually done a video on it. But the reason I like to use a send channel for the specifically for reverbs on these types of sounds is because it allows you to kind of, for example, equalize the sound or put a filter or various kind of effects to create that kind of contrast between the dry and the wet sound. So for example here, if I play this and we look at this, we'll notice that there's still a lot of low end coming through, and that low end is then being reverbed, and that's going to kind of clash with the kind of power that we're creating from the ARP sound. So just have a look at this kind of like frequency spectrum over here. So if we put an equalizer before the reverb and we cut out a bunch of that kind of like low end before reverbing it, we're just using the reverb to create a kind of like airiness, on top of the sound, and use the sound as a kind of like inspiration source, as a kind of like tone, if that makes sense. So again, I'm going to load up this Simplicity, Bricasti reverb, impulse responses. I like to use this Westchurch. It has a really cool character about it. So here you see we've created a separate channel for the reverb, and if we go back to this original sort of synth channel, we can actually turn this volume up. And if we get to a point where we don't have enough volume because we've turned this down, you can actually turn this to Prefader. And what that does is it kind of ignores the volume over here. And so it's obviously a bit extreme, but I kind of wanted to show you guys, how you can kind of like isolate the reverb sound and the original sound without having to actually recreate the entire channel itself. So that's pretty cool, to create this kind of like atmospheric effect around the lead sound. And what that helps to do is it helps to fill up a space. If you've specifically got something like a 101 type lead, which is generally a mono style sound, you just need to create something like a send reverb, EQ it kind of specifically, make some nice effects and stuff around it, some delays and stuff, and you can fill up a space. You don't necessarily need layers of hundreds of synth sounds and stuff like that. If you just use these effects that you've got sparingly and thoughtfully, you can create really good sounding tracks. So I'm going to mix in these two and get them to sound good together. Another nice little effect that I like to do is put a little bit of LFO tool onto this kind of send reverb, and I'll actually just adjust this so there's no clicks. That way creating a kind of pumping effect, but also it won't, get kind of too hectic every time the kick hits. The reverb will disappear a bit, if that makes sense. So let's go with a shape something like this. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. So yeah, like I said, check out my Patreon page if you're interested in that group or if you want to support me. And yeah, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.